The grand ballroom of Raven's Hollow Palace buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of guests mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. Princess Victoria, the king's sister and most trusted advisor, stood near the massive windows overlooking the palace gardens. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her emerald gown commanded respect from everyone who passed by. At 62, she had seen 3 generations of royalty navigate the complexities of modern monarchy. But tonight felt different. King Edward sat on his throne, looking tired and older than his 75 years. The recent health scares had taken their toll, and whispers about succession had grown louder in recent months. His son, Crown Prince Alexander, stood beside him, greeting dignitaries with practiced charm. Alexander was 45, married to Princess Catherine and father to 3 children. Everyone expected him to inherit the throne when the time came, but Princess Victoria had been watching, thinking, and growing increasingly concerned about the future of their kingdom of Eldoria. Alexander, while dutiful, lacked the natural leadership qualities that the modern world demanded. He was comfortable with tradition but struggled with change. The kingdom faced challenges that required bold thinking and fresh perspectives. Prince Michael, Alexander's younger brother by 2 years, moved through the crowd with ease. Unlike his older brother, Michael had spent years traveling the world, learning about different cultures and building relationships with international leaders. He had served in the military, worked with charitable organizations, and earned advanced degrees in economics and international relations. The people loved him, but royal law was clear about succession. Victoria's eyes followed Michael as he spoke with foreign ambassadors. His wife, Princess Sarah, stood beside him, equally impressive in her own right. Their 2 teenage children had grown up understanding both privilege and responsibility. The family represented everything the monarchy could be in the 21st century. The evening's main event was supposed to be a celebration of the kingdom's founding, but Victoria had other plans. She had spent weeks carefully considering her decision, consulting with constitutional experts and thinking about what was best for Eldoria. The conclusion she reached surprised even herself. As dinner ended and guests gathered for the traditional speeches, Victoria approached the microphone. The crowd quieted, expecting the usual ceremonial remarks. King Edward looked puzzled but nodded for her to proceed. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and beloved citizens of Eldoria," Victoria began, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "Tonight we celebrate our kingdom's rich history, but I believe we must also speak honestly about our future." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the typical royal speech filled with pleasantries and safe topics. Victoria's tone was serious, almost grave. "Our kingdom stands at a crossroads. The challenges we face require leadership that can adapt, inspire, and unite our people. The world has changed dramatically, and our monarchy must evolve to remain relevant and effective." King Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Crown Prince Alexander's face showed confusion and growing alarm. The assembled dignitaries and media representatives leaned forward, sensing that something significant was about to happen. After much consideration and prayer, "I must speak a truth that weighs heavily on my heart," Victoria continued. "While Crown Prince Alexander has served our kingdom with dedication and honor, I believe our future requires different leadership qualities than those of our traditional succession." The ballroom fell completely silent. Even the palace staff stopped moving to listen. Victoria's words were unprecedented in the kingdom's 800-year history. "I call upon King Edward to consider a change in our succession plans. Prince Michael possesses the vision, experience, and natural leadership abilities that our kingdom needs for the decades ahead. He understands the global community, connects with our people across all generations, and has proven his commitment to service time and time again." Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Several guests pulled out their phones despite royal protocol discouraging such behavior. The media representatives present could barely contain their excitement at witnessing such an extraordinary moment. Crown Prince Alexander's face went pale, then flushed red with anger and embarrassment. His wife, Princess Catherine, reached for his arm, but he pulled away, his eyes fixed on his aunt with a mixture of hurt and fury. Prince Michael appeared equally shocked, though for different reasons. He had never sought the throne, and had always supported his older brother's rightful place in the succession. His wife Sarah looked between the 2 brothers, clearly understanding the magnitude of what was happening. King Edward slowly rose from his throne, his aged hands gripping the ornate armrests. The room waited for his response to his sister's shocking declaration. "Princess Victoria," he said quietly, his voice barely audible through the ballroom's sound system. "These are serious matters that should be discussed privately, not announced at a public gathering." But Victoria wasn't finished. She had planned this moment carefully, knowing that once she spoke publicly there would be no turning back. "Your Majesty, I understand the gravity of my words, but our people deserve transparency. They deserve a monarchy that serves their interests above family tradition. Prince Michael has earned the respect of world leaders, built bridges across political divides, and demonstrated the kind of forward-thinking leadership that will carry Eldoria into the future." The crowd remained silent, but the tension was palpable. Royal security officials moved slightly closer to the main stage, unsure whether they were witnessing a political crisis or a family dispute. Crown Prince Alexander finally found his voice. "Aunt Victoria, you speak of things you don't understand. I have prepared my entire life for this responsibility. I have studied constitutional law, foreign policy, and economic theory. I have traveled extensively and built relationships with world leaders." Victoria turned to face her nephew directly. "Alexander, your dedication has never been in question. But dedication alone isn't enough. Our kingdom needs a leader who can inspire change, not simply manage tradition." The implications of Victoria's public declaration were staggering. Never before had a senior royal family member publicly questioned the line of succession. Constitutional experts would spend weeks debating whether her words carried any legal weight, but their political impact was immediate and undeniable. As the evening's events unfolded, it became clear that Princess Victoria had fundamentally changed the future of the Eldorian monarchy with her stunning announcement. The morning after Princess Victoria's shocking announcement brought chaos to Ravenshollow Palace. News outlets from around the world had picked up the story, with headlines screaming about the unprecedented royal crisis. Phone calls poured in from government officials, constitutional experts, and foreign diplomats, all seeking clarification about what the princess's words meant for the kingdom's stability. King Edward had barely slept. He sat in his private study, surrounded by legal documents and constitutional texts that his advisors had hastily gathered. The weight of 8 centuries of tradition pressed down on him as he tried to understand the full implications of his sister's public declaration. Prime Minister Margaret Thompson arrived at the palace before dawn, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of stress. She had served under King Edward for 12 years and had never faced a constitutional crisis of this magnitude. "Your Majesty," she said as she entered the study, "the parliamentary leaders are demanding an emergency session. The opposition party is calling for investigations into the stability of the monarchy. Financial markets are showing signs of nervousness." King Edward rubbed his temples, feeling every one of his 75 years. "Margaret, in all my years as king, I've never faced anything like this. Victoria has always been my most trusted advisor, my closest confidant. I never imagined she would create such turmoil. Sir, we need to address this quickly and decisively. The longer uncertainty continues, the more damage it will cause to the kingdom's reputation and stability." Meanwhile, Crown Prince Alexander paced furiously in his private apartments. His wife, Princess Catherine, tried to calm him, but the humiliation of being publicly questioned in front of hundreds of people had shaken him deeply. "How could she do this to our family?" Alexander demanded. "How could she embarrass me in front of the entire kingdom? I've done everything right, followed every protocol, prepared for this role my entire life." Catherine placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Alexander, you know your aunt loves this kingdom above all else. Perhaps we should try to understand why she believes so strongly that change is necessary." "Understand?" Alexander's voice rose. "She questioned my fitness to rule in front of foreign ambassadors, media representatives, and our own people. There's nothing to understand except that she's betrayed everything our family stands for." Their eldest son, Prince James, 18 years old and studying at university, had returned to the palace immediately upon hearing the news. He found his parents in heated discussion and could see the pain in his father's eyes. "Father, the students at university are talking about nothing else. Social media is exploding with opinions about Aunt Victoria's speech. Some people are calling her brave for speaking truth to power, while others say she's destroying the monarchy. Alexander sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. The reality of public opinion weighing in on his worthiness as future king was devastating. In another wing of the palace, Prince Michael met with his wife Sarah and their children. Unlike Alexander's family, their discussion focused on the unexpected burden that Victoria's words had placed on them. "Michael, you never wanted this," Sarah said quietly. "You've always been content supporting your brother and serving the kingdom in your own way. Are you prepared for what might come next?" Michael stared out the window at the palace gardens where he and Alexander had played as children. Their relationship had always been close, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The thought of competing against his brother for the throne filled him with dread. "I never asked for this, and I certainly never encouraged Aunt Victoria to speak as she did. But now that she has, I have to consider what's best for Eldoria. Can I ignore her words if there's truth in them?" Their daughter, Emma, 16 years old, spoke up with the directness of youth. "Dad, everyone knows you'd make a great king. You connect with people in ways Uncle Alexander never has. But is that worth destroying our family?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Princess Victoria spent the morning in meetings with constitutional lawyers and historical experts. She had known her words would create chaos, but she believed the kingdom's future was worth the temporary turmoil. "Your Royal Highness," said Professor David Hamilton, the kingdom's leading constitutional scholar, "what you've done is unprecedented, but it's not necessarily illegal. The king does have the theoretical power to change the succession, though it's never been attempted in our modern history." Victoria nodded grimly. "Professor, I understand the legal complexities, but I'm more concerned with the practical realities. Our kingdom faces challenges that require fresh thinking and dynamic leadership. Alexander is a good man, but he's not the right leader for our times." "The public reaction has been mixed," reported Communications Director Jennifer Walsh. "Younger citizens seem more supportive of your position, while older generations are divided. International reaction is intense curiosity mixed with concern about our stability. As news of the royal crisis spread globally, diplomatic consequences began to emerge. The ambassador from France called to express concern about upcoming trade negotiations. The German embassy requested clarification about the kingdom's political stability. Even allies worried about what internal royal conflict might mean for international relationships. Back in the king's study, a family meeting was finally arranged for the afternoon. King Edward had decided that private family discussion was essential before any public response could be formulated. "I've asked Victoria, Alexander, and Michael to meet with me," he told Prime Minister Thompson. "This family crisis threatens to become a constitutional crisis, and we must resolve it quickly." The Prime Minister nodded but looked worried. "Your Majesty, whatever decision you make will have lasting consequences for the monarchy and the kingdom. The world is watching, and our people deserve clarity." As afternoon approached, palace staff prepared the king's private conference room for what would likely be the most important family meeting in the kingdom's modern history. Security was increased around the palace as protesters began gathering outside the gates, some supporting Victoria's call for change, others defending traditional succession. Television crews from major networks worldwide set up positions across from the palace, hoping to capture any developments in the unprecedented royal drama. Inside the palace, 4 people prepared for a conversation that would determine the future of an 800-year-old monarchy. King Edward faced the most difficult decision of his reign, torn between family loyalty and what might be best for his kingdom. Princess Victoria steeled herself for the family confrontation she had triggered, knowing that her relationships with her nephew and brother might never recover from her public declaration. Crown Prince Alexander struggled with anger, hurt, and the terrifying possibility that everything he had prepared for might be taken away. Prince Michael wrestled with loyalty to his brother and the growing realization that his kingdom might truly need him to step forward. The stage was set for a family meeting that would reshape the future of the Eldorian monarchy. The king's private conference room had never felt smaller as the 4 family members took their seats around the ancient oak table. Portraits of past monarchs looked down from the walls, silent witnesses to the most dramatic succession crisis in the kingdom's modern history. King Edward sat at the head of the table, his weathered hands folded before him. To his right sat Crown Prince Alexander, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Prince Michael occupied the chair to the king's left, his usual confident demeanor replaced by visible tension. Princess Victoria faced them all from the opposite end of the table, her spine straight and her expression determined. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before King Edward finally spoke. "Victoria, you have created a situation that threatens everything our family has built over generations. I need to understand why you believed a public announcement was the appropriate way to address your concerns." Victoria met her brother's gaze steadily. "Edward, I tried to discuss these matters privately with you multiple times over the past year. Each time you dismissed my concerns or changed the subject. The kingdom cannot wait for gradual understanding when decisive action is needed." Alexander's composure finally cracked. "Aunt Victoria, you humiliated me in front of the entire world. You questioned my abilities, my character, and my right to inherit what has been my destiny since birth. How can you justify destroying our family for your personal opinions?" "Personal opinions?" Victoria's voice rose slightly. "Alexander, I've watched you struggle with modern challenges for years. You're uncomfortable with social media. You avoid difficult conversations with young people, and you rely too heavily on traditional approaches that no longer work." Michael finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Aunt Victoria, while I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, I never asked for this. Alexander is my older brother, and I've always supported his rightful place as heir." Victoria turned to Michael with intensity in her eyes. "Michael, this isn't about what you've asked for. It's about what the kingdom needs. You've traveled to over 50 countries, you speak 4 languages fluently. You understand economics and international relations in ways that connect with modern realities." King Edward raised his hand for silence. "Let me be clear about the legal situation. I do have the constitutional authority to change the succession, but it would require parliamentary approval and likely a national referendum. The process would take months and could destabilize the monarchy permanently." Alexander leaned forward desperately. "Father, you cannot seriously be considering this. I've dedicated my entire life to preparing for the throne. I've studied every aspect of governance, I've built relationships with world leaders, I've served our people faithfully." "No one questions your dedication, Alexander," the king replied sadly. "But Victoria raises valid concerns about the challenges ahead. The monarchy must evolve to survive, and change is never easy." Michael stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. "This is tearing our family apart. Is any throne worth destroying the relationships we've built over a lifetime?" Victoria joined him at the window. "Michael, our family will survive this crisis, but the monarchy might not survive without necessary changes. Look at what's happened to other royal families who failed to adapt to modern times. You're asking me to compete against my own brother for something he's rightfully earned," Michael said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'm asking you to consider what's best for 40 million Eldorian citizens," Victoria replied firmly. Alexander's wife, Princess Catherine, had remained silent throughout the meeting, but now she spoke with quiet authority. "May I suggest that we're approaching this incorrectly? Instead of viewing this as a competition between brothers, perhaps we should consider how both of their strengths could serve the kingdom." All eyes turned to Catherine as she continued. "Alexander has unmatched knowledge of constitutional law and royal protocol. Michael has exceptional skills in international relations and public communication. Rather than choosing one over the other, perhaps there's a way to utilize both sets of abilities." King Edward looked intrigued. "Catherine, what exactly are you suggesting?" "The Constitution allows for co-regency in times of transition or special circumstances. Alexander could serve as king with primary responsibility for domestic affairs and constitutional matters, while Michael could serve as co-regent with focus on international relations and modernization initiatives." The room fell silent as everyone considered this unexpected proposal. It was unprecedented in Eldorian history, but it wasn't technically impossible. Victoria frowned thoughtfully. A co-regency would be complicated, but it might address the kingdom's need for both traditional stability and modern adaptability. Alexander looked hopeful for the first time since the crisis began. "Michael and I have always worked well together. We complement each other's strengths and understand each other's weaknesses." Michael returned to the table, his expression showing cautious interest. "It would require clear divisions of responsibility and constant cooperation. Any conflict between us would damage the monarchy more than the current situation." King Edward studied both of his sons carefully. This would be uncharted territory. Constitutional experts would need to craft new frameworks. Parliament would need to approve unprecedented arrangements, and the people would need to accept radical changes to 800 years of tradition. But it might work, Victoria admitted slowly. It would give the kingdom access to both of your abilities while maintaining family unity. Over the next hour, they discussed practical considerations. How would official duties be divided? How would public appearances be managed? What would happen if the brothers disagreed on important decisions? How would international leaders respond to shared monarchy? Alexander warmed to the idea as they talked. Michael has always been better with crowds and informal settings. I'm more comfortable with formal ceremonies and legal matters. We could play to our respective strengths. Michael nodded thoughtfully. The international community knows both of us, but they might actually be more impressed by a monarchy innovative enough to create new forms of leadership. As the afternoon wore on, the initial anger and hurt began to transform into collaborative problem-solving. Princess Victoria watched with growing satisfaction as her nephews worked together to address the challenges she had raised. King Edward finally called for a break. I need time to consider all of this with my constitutional advisors. Victoria, your public announcement has created expectations that must be addressed soon. We cannot leave the kingdom in uncertainty much longer. How much time do you need? Victoria asked. 48 hours, the king replied. I'll meet with the Prime Minister, constitutional experts, and parliamentary leaders. If we proceed with Catherine's co-regency proposal, it will require careful planning and broad political support. As the family members prepared to leave the conference room, relationships had begun to heal, but enormous challenges remained ahead. Alexander approached Victoria with hesitation. Aunt Victoria, I'm still hurt by your public criticism, but I'm beginning to understand your motivations. Perhaps you saw something that I couldn't see myself. Victoria embraced her nephew warmly. Alexander, you will make a good king, but you'll make an even better king with Michael's partnership and support. The brothers looked at each other with new understanding. Their relationship had been tested, but it might emerge stronger than ever. News of the potential co-regency solution leaked within hours of the family meeting, sending shockwaves through political circles and capturing international attention. Prime Minister Margaret Thompson found herself fielding calls from world leaders, constitutional experts, and nervous financial markets as the kingdom grappled with the possibility of unprecedented change. The Prime Minister convened an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss the implications of shared monarchy. Finance Minister Robert Chen expressed immediate concerns about economic stability, while Foreign Secretary Diana Walsh worried about international relations. A co-regency has never been attempted in modern democratic monarchy, Chen argued. Financial markets thrive on stability and predictability. This arrangement could create confusion about who has ultimate authority in economic decisions. Walsh nodded in agreement. Our allies need to know who they're negotiating with. If Prince Alexander handles domestic affairs and Prince Michael manages international relations, what happens when those responsibilities overlap? Who speaks for the kingdom in crisis situations? Thompson rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of constitutional precedent pressing down on her. The legal framework for co-regency exists in our constitution, but it was written centuries ago for completely different circumstances. We're essentially creating a new form of government. Professor David Hamilton, the kingdom's leading constitutional scholar, had spent the night reviewing legal precedents from other monarchies throughout history. His research revealed both promising examples and cautionary tales. Rome had successful co-emperors during certain periods, he explained to the assembled experts, but other attempts at shared rule have led to civil conflict and political instability. The key factor seems to be whether the co-rulers genuinely complement each other or compete for power. Meanwhile, public opinion polls showed the kingdom deeply divided. Younger citizens, particularly those under 35, expressed enthusiasm for the innovative approach. They saw co-regency as proof that the monarchy could adapt to modern realities and utilize the best talents available. Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old teacher from the capital city, represented this perspective. Why should we limit ourselves to one leader when we have two princes with different but valuable skills? Prince Alexander understands our laws and traditions, while Prince Michael connects with international issues and younger generations. Together they could be stronger than either one alone. However, Older citizens and traditional monarchists viewed the proposal with deep skepticism. Lord William Hastings, chairman of the Royal Heritage Society, publicly criticized the entire concept. 800 years of stable succession have made Eldoria one of the world's most respected monarchies, he declared to reporters. This unprecedented experiment risks destroying everything our ancestors built. Monarchy requires clear authority and unambiguous leadership. Religious leaders also weighed in on the debate. Archbishop Michael Patterson, head of the Eldorian Church, expressed cautious support for arrangements that strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy's moral authority. If co-regency serves the greater good of our people and maintains the sacred nature of royal service, then perhaps divine providence is working through these unusual circumstances, he said, in a carefully worded statement. International reactions varied dramatically. Progressive European monarchies expressed interest in Eldoria's innovative approach, while more traditional kingdoms worried about the precedent it might set. The President of France called King Edward personally to discuss potential impacts on bilateral relations. "Your Majesty," President Laurent Dubois said during their private conversation, "France has enjoyed excellent relations with Eldoria for generations. We want to ensure that internal changes don't affect our partnership in European affairs." King Edward assured him that any new arrangements would strengthen rather than complicate international relationships, but privately wondered if he could deliver on such promises. Back at the palace, Prince Alexander and Prince Michael began the delicate process of defining how co-regency might actually work. They met in Alexander's study, surrounded by constitutional texts and organizational charts, trying to envision practical governance arrangements. International trade agreements that affect domestic employment, Alexander mused, studying a list of potential scenarios. Who takes the lead on those decisions? Michael considered the question carefully. We'd have to establish clear protocols for consultation and decision-making. Neither of us should act independently on matters that affect the other's responsibilities. Their sister-in-law, Princess Sarah, joined the discussion with insights from her background in organizational management. Successful partnerships require defined roles, regular communication, and mechanisms for resolving disagreements. You'll need formal structures, not just good intentions. The brothers spent hours working through hypothetical situations. What if one of them disagreed with the other's approach to a crisis? How would they handle public appearances where both domestic and international issues intersected? Who would represent the crown at state funerals or royal weddings in other countries? Princess Catherine proved invaluable in these discussions, having studied public administration before her marriage. You need a joint council with rotating chairmanship, she suggested. Weekly meetings to coordinate activities, monthly reviews of major decisions, and annual assessments of the arrangement's effectiveness. As they worked through practical details, the brothers discovered unexpected benefits to shared responsibility. Alexander's methodical approach to legal analysis complemented Michael's intuitive understanding of public sentiment. Michael's international experience provided context for Alexander's domestic policy expertise. "I never realized how much international law affects domestic regulations," Alexander admitted. "Your perspective on global trade patterns helps me understand why certain economic policies succeed or fail." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "And your knowledge of constitutional precedent keeps me from suggesting changes that might seem good in theory but could create legal chaos in practice." Princess Victoria watched these developments with growing satisfaction, but also with awareness of the enormous challenges still ahead. Public announcement of the co-regency plan would require careful timing and masterful communication to maintain political stability. She met privately with the palace's communications team to develop messaging strategies. "We need to present this as evolution, not revolution," she advised. "The monarchy is adapting to serve the people better, not abandoning tradition." Communications Director Jennifer Walsh had spent 2 days analyzing media coverage and public reactions. "The narrative is currently focused on crisis and conflict," she reported. "We need to shift that to innovation and strength." The brothers working together as a team rather than competing for power. However, serious obstacles remained. Several parliamentary leaders expressed constitutional concerns about approving such unprecedented arrangements. The opposition party demanded detailed legal analysis before considering any legislation enabling co-regency. Lord Chancellor Emma Davidson, the kingdom's senior legal officer, warned that constitutional changes could take months to implement properly. "We're not just creating new royal arrangements," she explained. "We're potentially changing fundamental principles of monarchical authority that date back centuries." Financial markets continued showing nervousness about the uncertainty. The Eldorian currency fluctuated as investors tried to assess the stability implications of shared monarchy. Several major corporations postponed investment decisions until the succession question was resolved. As the 48-hour deadline King Edward had set approached, pressure mounted from all directions. The royal family had found a potential solution that preserved both brothers' dignity and utilized their respective strengths, but implementing it would require navigating complex political, legal, and social challenges. The king faced a decision that would define not only his remaining years on the throne, but the entire future of the Eldorian monarchy. Traditional succession offered stability and continuity, but innovation might better serve the kingdom's needs in a rapidly changing world. King Edward stood alone in his private study at dawn, watching the sun rise over the palace gardens where his sons had played as children. The 48 hours were almost up, and the weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical burden. In his hands he held two documents that would shape the kingdom's future. The first document outlined traditional succession, with Crown Prince Alexander assuming the throne upon Edward's abdication or death. It represented 8 centuries of continuity, legal certainty, and established precedent. Constitutional experts assured him this path offered the least risk to monarchical stability. The second document proposed the unprecedented co-regency arrangement his family had developed. It was revolutionary, potentially strengthening the monarchy by utilizing both sons' abilities, but it also carried enormous risks and required complex parliamentary approval. Prime Minister Thompson had delivered her final assessment the previous evening. "Your Majesty, both options have merit, but the co-regency would require at least 6 months of parliamentary debate, constitutional review, and public consultation. The kingdom cannot remain in uncertainty that long." King Edward had spent the night in prayer and contemplation, consulting the portraits of his ancestors and seeking guidance from history's lessons. His father had always told him that a king's greatest duty was to serve the people's best interests, even when those interests conflicted with personal preferences or family comfort. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Princess Victoria entered quietly, carrying a tea service and wearing the concerned expression of a sister rather than a royal advisor. "Edward, you look like you haven't slept at all," she said, setting down the tea and settling into the chair across from his desk. "How could I sleep when the decision I make today will echo through generations?" He replied wearily. "Victoria, your public announcement forced this crisis, but perhaps it was a crisis we needed to face." Victoria poured tea for both of them, her hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. "I've been thinking about Mother's final words to us before she died. She said the monarchy's greatest strength was its ability to adapt while maintaining its essential character." "I remember," Edward said softly, "but adaptation and revolution are different things. What you're asking me to consider has never been attempted in our modern constitutional framework. Edward, sometimes unprecedented times require unprecedented solutions." Before Edward could respond, Crown Prince Alexander and Prince Michael arrived together. Having been summoned for the final family consultation, both men looked tired but determined, their earlier anger replaced by shared concern for the kingdom's welfare. "Father," Alexander said as they took seats around the small conference table, "Michael and I have spent the past 2 days working through every practical detail of co-regency. We believe it could work, but only if you're completely confident in the arrangement." Michael nodded in agreement. "We've also discussed what would happen if co-regency proves unworkable. We've developed transition plans that would allow return to traditional succession without major constitutional crisis." King Edward studied his sons carefully. "You're both willing to accept shared responsibility rather than individual authority?" "Yes," they answered simultaneously, then looked at each other with slight smiles at their synchronization. Alexander leaned forward earnestly. "Father, I've realized that my pride in individual succession was less important than effective service to our people. If sharing the throne makes the monarchy stronger, Then that's what we should do. Michael added, I never wanted to compete with Alexander for something that was rightfully his. But co-regency isn't competition, it's collaboration. We can achieve more together than either of us could alone. Princess Victoria watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. Her dramatic announcement had created crisis, but it had also forced her family to confront important truths about leadership and service. King Edward rose and walked to the window again, looking out at the capital city where millions of citizens waited for his decision. Parliament was scheduled to convene an emergency session within the hour. International media had gathered outside the palace gates. Financial markets around the world were watching for any news that might affect stability. I've made my decision, he announced quietly, turning back to face his family. The room fell completely silent. I will announce that Crown Prince Alexander remains my designated successor, with Prince Michael serving as his primary advisor and representative for international affairs. This arrangement preserves constitutional tradition while utilizing both of their strengths. Alexander and Michael exchanged glances, processing this unexpected variation on their co-regency discussions. This isn't quite co-regency, Michael observed. It's enhanced succession with formal advisory roles, Edward nodded. It accomplishes many of the same goals without requiring constitutional revolution. Alexander will be king, but Michael will have official status and clearly defined responsibilities that utilize his international expertise. Victoria looked thoughtful. It's more conservative than what we discussed, but it might be more politically feasible. Exactly, Edward replied. Change doesn't always require revolution. Sometimes evolution serves better than dramatic transformation. Alexander stood and embraced his father. Thank you for trusting me with the crown, but also for recognizing the value of Michael's partnership. Michael joined the embrace. This arrangement honors tradition while acknowledging modern realities. I can serve the kingdom effectively without competing with my brother. The king called Prime Minister Thompson to inform her of his decision before making any public announcement. Her relief was audible through the phone. Your Majesty, this approach will be much easier to implement legally and politically. Parliament can approve advisory roles and expanded responsibilities without changing fundamental constitutional principles. Within an hour, King Edward addressed the nation from the palace's main ceremonial room. Crown Prince Alexander and Prince Michael flanked him, presenting a united front to the kingdom and the world. My fellow citizens, the king began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership. Recent days have brought important discussions about the future of our monarchy. After careful consideration and family consultation, I am pleased to announce arrangements that will strengthen our kingdom's leadership. He outlined the enhanced succession plan, emphasizing how it preserved tradition while adapting to modern needs. Alexander would inherit the throne with full monarchical authority, while Michael would serve as senior royal advisor for international affairs, with official diplomatic status and clearly defined responsibilities. This arrangement utilizes the exceptional abilities of both my sons while maintaining the constitutional stability our kingdom requires, Edward explained. Prince Alexander's expertise in law and domestic governance, combined with Prince Michael's international experience and modernization insights, will serve our people well in the decades ahead. Public reaction was generally positive. The solution appeared innovative without being revolutionary, preserving monarchy while acknowledging the need for fresh approaches to governance. Financial markets responded favorably to the clarity and stability the announcement provided. The Eldorian currency strengthened, and several corporations announced they would proceed with previously postponed investment plans. International leaders expressed satisfaction with the arrangement. The French president called to congratulate the royal family on finding a solution that maintained Eldoria's stability while positioning the kingdom for future challenges. However, not everyone was satisfied. Some supporters of dramatic change felt the arrangement didn't go far enough, while some traditionalists worried that any deviation from historical precedent set dangerous precedents for future interference with succession. Princess Victoria faced mixed reactions to her role in creating the crisis that led to this resolution. Some praised her courage in speaking difficult truths, while others criticized her for creating unnecessary turmoil. As the day ended and the immediate crisis passed, The royal family gathered privately to reflect on the dramatic events that had transformed their relationships and the kingdom's future. The monarchy had survived its greatest modern challenge, but the real test would come in the months and years ahead, as the new arrangements were implemented and their effectiveness evaluated. 3 months after King Edward's announcement, the new royal arrangements faced their first major test when a diplomatic crisis erupted with the neighboring kingdom of Valyria. A disputed trade agreement and conflicting fishing rights in shared waters threatened to escalate into a serious international incident. Crown Prince Alexander sat in the palace's Situation Room, surrounded by constitutional advisors and domestic policy experts. As future king, he held ultimate responsibility for the kingdom's response. But the crisis clearly fell within Prince Michael's designated area of expertise. The Valyrians are demanding immediate renegotiation of the fishing quotas, reported Foreign Secretary Diana Walsh. Their new government claims the previous agreements were unfavorable and are threatening to withdraw from broader trade partnerships. Alexander studied the complex legal documents spread across the conference table. The constitutional implications were clear to him. Any response required parliamentary approval and careful consideration of domestic fishing industry impacts. But the international diplomatic nuances were Michael's specialty. "What's Michael's assessment of the situation?" Alexander asked. "Prince Michael is currently in Valyria's capital meeting directly with their leadership," Walsh replied. "He believes this crisis is really about their upcoming elections. The new government needs to appear strong to their voters, but they don't actually want to damage economic relationships." This division of labor represented exactly what King Edward had envisioned when creating the enhanced succession arrangement. Alexander's deep understanding of constitutional requirements complemented Michael's intuitive grasp of international politics. However, the crisis also revealed potential complications in the new system. Several parliamentary leaders questioned whether Prince Michael had sufficient authority to negotiate on the kingdom's behalf. Opposition leader Patricia Morrison raised concerns during an emergency legislative session. "We have a crown prince who holds constitutional authority but lacks diplomatic experience working alongside a prince who understands international affairs but has no formal legal standing to bind the kingdom to agreements," she argued. "This confusion could weaken our negotiating position." Prime Minister Thompson defended the arrangement, but privately worried about the constitutional ambiguities the crisis had exposed. She arranged a secure conference call between the brothers to coordinate their response strategy. "Alexander, the Valyrians respect your constitutional position, but they're more comfortable dealing with me because of our previous relationships," Michael explained from his hotel room in Valyria's capital. "I think I can negotiate a face-saving compromise that preserves our fishing rights while giving them something to show their voters." Alexander appreciated his brother's diplomatic insights, but constitutional lawyers had warned him about the legal implications of any agreements. "Michael, I trust your judgment completely, but any deal you reach must be preliminary pending my formal approval and parliamentary review. We can't create precedents that undermine constitutional authority." "Understood," Michael replied. "I'll negotiate framework agreements that you can formally approve. We'll present this as careful constitutional procedure rather than uncertainty about authority." The brothers' coordinated approach proved effective. Michael's personal relationships with Valyrian leaders allowed him to understand their domestic political pressures, while Alexander's constitutional expertise ensured that any agreements would be legally sound and politically acceptable to Parliament. Within a week, they had crafted a solution that gave Valyria minor adjustments to fishing quotas in less productive waters, while maintaining Eldoria's access to the most valuable fishing grounds. The Valyrian government could claim victory for their voters, while Eldoria preserved its essential economic interests. But the crisis had also revealed growing pains in the new royal arrangement. Palace staff struggled to understand which prince had authority over specific decisions. International partners sometimes bypassed Alexander to deal directly with Michael, creating protocol confusion. Princess Victoria observed these challenges with concern during her weekly meeting with King Edward. "The arrangement is working, but it needs refinement," she told her brother. "Clear protocols and better communication systems are essential." Edward nodded thoughtfully. "Change is never smooth initially. The important thing is that both Alexander and Michael are working together, rather than competing for authority. However, not all reactions to the crisis were positive. Some traditional monarchists argued that the diplomatic confusion validated their opposition to any deviation from historical succession practices. Lord William Hastings published a critical editorial questioning whether the new arrangements weakened rather than strengthened royal authority. When foreign governments are uncertain about who speaks for the crown, the monarchy's prestige suffers, he wrote. Clear, unambiguous authority has been the foundation of successful monarchy for centuries. Young supporters of the royal innovation responded with their own media campaigns, highlighting how the brothers' collaboration had resolved the crisis more effectively than traditional approaches might have managed. University student Sarah Mitchell, who had supported the changes from the beginning, organized a social media campaign praising the resolution. Prince Alexander's constitutional knowledge and Prince Michael's diplomatic skills solved this crisis faster than any single leader could have managed alone, she posted to thousands of followers. The debate over royal effectiveness became part of larger national conversations about leadership and governance in modern democracies. Political science professors analyzed the Eldorian experiment as a potential model for other countries facing similar challenges. Professor Janet Richardson from the Royal University published an academic paper arguing that distributed leadership might be more effective than individual authority in addressing complex modern challenges. The Valerian crisis demonstrates how complementary expertise can produce better outcomes than relying on a single leader's limited knowledge, she wrote. Meanwhile, the royal family worked to address the practical problems the crisis had revealed. Alexander and Michael established weekly coordination meetings to discuss upcoming challenges and ensure clear communication about their respective roles. Princess Catherine and Princess Sarah collaborated on developing clearer protocols for palace staff, international partners, and government officials. Their organizational expertise proved invaluable in creating systems that supported rather than hindered the brothers' partnership. We need written procedures that specify when each prince takes the lead, how decisions are coordinated, and how disagreements are resolved, Catherine explained during a staff meeting. Informal cooperation isn't sufficient for complex governance. Sarah added practical insights from her background in management consulting. Successful partnerships require regular evaluation and adjustment. The brothers should assess what's working and what needs improvement every month. As the immediate crisis passed and diplomatic relations with Valeria stabilized, King Edward reflected on the success of his decision. The new arrangement had faced its first significant test and proven effective, but ongoing refinements would be necessary. The king began planning for his gradual transition toward retirement, confident that his sons could handle increasing responsibilities together. However, he also recognized that larger challenges lay ahead as the arrangement matured and faced more complex tests. Public opinion polls showed growing support for the enhanced succession system. Citizens appreciated seeing their future leaders work together effectively rather than compete for power. International partners expressed satisfaction with having clear points of contact for different types of issues. But Princess Victoria remained watchful for signs of strain or conflict between the brothers. She had triggered this transformation by speaking publicly about the need for change, and she felt responsible for ensuring its continued success. The real test won't be crises like Valeria, she confided to her personal secretary. It will be whether Alexander and Michael can maintain their partnership when they disagree about fundamental issues or when personal ambitions create tension. As autumn approached, the royal family prepared for the next phase of implementing their unprecedented arrangement, knowing that each challenge would further define how modern monarchy could adapt while preserving its essential character. 1 year after Princess Victoria's stunning announcement that had shaken the Eldorian monarchy to its foundations, the royal family gathered for the annual Foundation Day celebrations. The same ballroom where Victoria had publicly challenged royal succession now hosted a very different kind of gathering. King Edward, now 76, looked healthier and more relaxed than he had in years. The resolution of the succession crisis had lifted an enormous burden from his shoulders, allowing him to focus on the ceremonial and advisory aspects of monarchy he most enjoyed. Crown Prince Alexander stood confidently at his father's side, no longer carrying the weight of doubt about his capabilities. The past year had proven that his constitutional expertise and careful approach to governance were exactly what the kingdom needed for domestic stability. His approval ratings had risen steadily as citizens witnessed his thoughtful leadership style. Prince Michael mingled easily with international ambassadors and foreign dignitaries, his role as senior royal advisor for international affairs having transformed Eldoria's global relationships. 3 major trade agreements, 2 significant cultural exchange programs, and a groundbreaking environmental cooperation initiative had emerged from his diplomatic efforts. Princess Victoria watched the proceedings with deep satisfaction, though she remained aware that her public challenge had forever changed her relationships within the family. Alexander had forgiven her actions, but their interactions remained more formal than before. Michael had always understood her motivations, but even he sometimes struggled with the memory of that dramatic evening. The year had brought remarkable successes that validated the enhanced succession arrangement. When neighboring Astoria faced political instability, Alexander's constitutional expertise helped design democratic reforms, while Michael's diplomatic relationships facilitated international support for peaceful transition. The brothers' coordinated response earned praise from the European Way, Union, and strengthened Eldoria's reputation as a stabilizing force in regional affairs. Economic indicators showed the kingdom thriving under the new leadership model. International investors appreciated having clear contacts for different types of business relationships. Tourism increased as global media coverage of the innovative monarchy attracted curious visitors from around the world. Princess Catherine had emerged as an unexpected but crucial figure in making the arrangement work. Her organizational skills and diplomatic grace helped coordinate between the brothers' different working styles and prevented minor disagreements from becoming major conflicts. Princess Sarah's international background proved invaluable in supporting Michael's expanded role while maintaining strong relationships with Alexander and Catherine. The 4 had developed into an effective leadership team that complemented the brothers' formal partnership. But the year had also revealed ongoing challenges that required constant attention. Constitutional scholars continued debating the legal implications of distributed royal authority. Some traditionalists remained skeptical about any deviation from historical succession practices. International protocol experts still struggled with questions about precedence and authority in formal ceremonies. More significantly, the arrangement required the brothers to subordinate personal ambitions to collective success. Both men had moments of frustration when their different approaches created tension or when media coverage focused on their partnership rather than individual accomplishments. King Edward had watched these dynamics carefully, knowing that the long-term success of the enhanced succession depended on Alexander and Michael maintaining genuine cooperation rather than merely public unity. During a private family dinner following the Foundation Day ceremonies, he addressed the elephant in the room that no one wanted to discuss directly. Alexander, Michael, you've both made significant sacrifices to make this arrangement work. He began quietly. Alexander, you've shared authority that traditionally belongs exclusively to the heir. Michael, you've accepted complex responsibilities without the ultimate constitutional protection of the crown. The brothers exchanged glances, recognizing that their father was voicing concerns they had both wrestled with privately. Alexander spoke first. Father, I've learned more about effective leadership in the past year than in all my previous preparation combined. Sharing responsibility has made me a better future king, not a weaker one. Michael nodded in agreement. The arrangement has given me opportunities to serve the kingdom that I never would have had under traditional succession. I'm fulfilled in ways I never expected. Victoria leaned forward with interest. But are you both prepared for this partnership to continue for decades? What happens when you disagree about fundamental issues? What happens when one of you wants to take the kingdom in a different direction? It was the question that had lurked beneath all their careful cooperation, whether their partnership could survive major disagreements or changing circumstances. Michael answered thoughtfully. We've already faced disagreements about policy approaches and resource allocation. The key is that we both prioritize the kingdom's welfare above our personal preferences. Alexander added, We've also learned that disagreement doesn't mean failure. Sometimes our different perspectives produce better solutions than either of us would reach independently. Catherine smiled at her husband's maturity. You've both grown tremendously over the past year. Alexander is more flexible and collaborative than ever before, while Michael has developed deeper appreciation for constitutional traditions and careful governance. King Edward felt a profound sense of satisfaction as he observed his family's transformation. The crisis that had once threatened to tear them apart had ultimately strengthened their bonds and their service to the kingdom. As the evening progressed, they discussed plans for the coming years. Alexander would gradually assume more domestic responsibilities as Edward prepared for eventual retirement. Michael would expand his international role to include trade missions, cultural exchanges, and environmental initiatives. The arrangement had evolved beyond their original conception into something more dynamic and responsive to changing circumstances. Rather than fixed roles, they had developed flexible partnerships that adapted to specific challenges and opportunities. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for the enhanced succession system. Citizens appreciated having leaders who worked together rather than competed for power. International partners valued Eldoria's innovative approach to governance and leadership. Several other monarchies had quietly begun studying the Eldorian model for potential application to their own succession challenges. The Kingdom of Northland sent constitutional experts to observe how the arrangement functioned in practice. As the family prepared to leave the ballroom where the crisis had begun, Princess Victoria reflected on the courage required to speak truth to power and the wisdom needed to transform crisis into opportunity. "Edward," she said to her brother, as they walked together through the palace corridors, "do you ever regret that I forced this transformation on our family?" King Edward considered the question carefully before responding. "Victoria, you gave us the gift of examining our assumptions and discovering better ways to serve our people. That's exactly what royal advisors should do, even when it creates temporary discomfort." As they reached the palace's main entrance, where portraits of past monarchs looked down from the walls, Edward paused to study the faces of his ancestors. "They ruled in their times according to the needs and challenges they faced," he said quietly. "We've done the same for our time. The monarchy has survived and thrived by adapting while preserving its essential character." Alexander and Michael joined them, their partnership having become so natural that they moved in unconscious coordination. The future of the Eldorian monarchy looked brighter than it had in generations. The crisis that had begun with Princess Victoria's shocking announcement had transformed not just royal succession but the very nature of monarchical leadership. Through courage, compromise, and commitment to service above self, the royal family had created a new model that honored tradition while embracing innovation. As the palace lights dimmed and the family retired to their private quarters, the kingdom rested secure in the knowledge that their future leaders had proven they could work together, effectively, adaptively, and with genuine care for their people's welfare. The Eldorian monarchy had not just survived its greatest modern challenge, it had emerged stronger, more relevant, and better prepared for whatever challenges the future might bring.